Hey everybody, welcome to Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. This is episode number 449 of our YouTube channel and podcast, and I cannot be more excited to continue sharing with you guys personal finance topics that I think could be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. Today, we are going to be talking about target date funds. And I know that we've talked about target date funds before, and I'll kind of rehash what they are and how they work. But I also want to talk about some of their shortcomings and why they might not be beneficial for you throughout your entire investing life, and why this whole idea of set it and forget it when it comes to your investments may not benefit you as much as you may ultimately think. So stick around for a discussion of all that and more in today's episode. Before we get started though, if you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan. And that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. Then if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just DM me on any of the major social media sites and tell me that you are interested in financial coaching sessions. And you and I can begin working together, pushing towards your long-term financial goals and ultimately pushing you on towards long-term financial freedom, which is what I hope for every single individual who's watching or listening to this show on a day-to-day basis. Now, if I told most individuals, right, most people who have to manage their own money, if I told them, hey, I could offer you an investment that is likely to make you pretty good returns over a long period of time, right? Pretty close to, stock market average returns over a long period of time. And it will decrease in risk over time. And you'll never have to change what you're invested in. Most people would go, yeah, sure, right? Sounds like a good value proposition. I don't have to worry about it. I can just pour money into it. I don't have to worry about my risk changing because it'll change along with my risk. I can just, set it and forget it, right? It sounds like a fantastic proposition, and that is what target date funds tend to offer, right? Target date funds are very, very easy. They're very, very simple, and I think they are a very good creation of the financial industry, because something that the financial industry has to continue to work on and continue to innovate in is the fact that most people aren't paying super close attention to their investments, maybe not near as close as they should. Now, it's not to say that, buying something over a long period of time is not typically what's most beneficial when it comes to returns. But I don't think people are paying as close attention to their risk tolerance as they should, or to their stage in life, or what their money's being used for as they should, right? And target date funds are one of those innovations that actually helps you in some of those places, because target date funds specifically are going to, over time, decrease the amount of risk that you're taking. So let me just back up a second. What a target date fund is typically known as a target retirement fund, right? Target date retirement fund. And what it does is it takes some date in the future, and it's typically in 5-year increments for most of the places that create them. And target date funds are funds of funds, right? So what a target date fund does is it sets a particular date, right? And it says, okay, you're going to need your money on that date, or approximately that date. So what we're going to do between now and that date is we are going to get you invested in things that are going to become less and less, quote unquote, risky or volatile between here and that date. So that typically looks something like starting very heavy in a stock allocation and very light in a bond and cash allocation. And then, so something like a 90-10 or 89-11 or something. And then moving all the way to like a 20-80, right? Where your stocks are 20 and then bonds and cash are the other 80% of your portfolio, and then just staying like that. And so they decrease your risk over time, the amount of volatility in the portfolio that is perceived over time, and they are a fund of funds. So it's a mutual fund that you would purchase, but within it is holding, maybe a total stock market index fund for the equity part, maybe a total bond market index fund for the bond part, and then obviously money market funds for the cash, right? And so this is what they do. And so that sounds pretty neat. And a lot of people jump on board. And I don't think they are bad things. I think for the vast majority of people who are investing in a 401k or maybe just pouring money into an IRA, and you don't want to have much autonomy when it comes to the picking of your own investments, and you're very comfortable with having this type of allocation over time, listen, I am on board with you, and you want your investing to be easy. And that's the whole point of target date funds. They make investing easy. You don't have to look at a bunch of different mutual funds. You don't have to look at a bunch of different ETFs. You find one that coincides with the date that you think you'll need your money, and then you invest in that fund, and that's cool, right? Very little to think about when it comes to target date funds, and they have many uses, right? They don't just have to be used for retirement. Many people use target date funds when they are investing for their children's college as well, because that also has some fixed end date, right? Where, you're going to start needing the money at that point. And so you can use your investments in that way and use a target date fund that may have an earlier maturity than your retirement target date fund for your children's college. Now, the argument today is not that target retirement funds are bad, right? Or not that they should never be used, but it is that they may not be the best at all times, right? And it may not be something that works after a certain point in your financial life, okay? So I'm going to listen to this argument, right? This argument made by Sarah O'Brien in this article that says target date funds work up to a point, so don't just set it and forget it, okay? So she says, when you find yourself about a decade away from retirement, it might be time to evaluate whether the target date fund you've been investing in still makes sense for you. Although these set it and forget it funds offer a way to put your savings on autopilot by gradually shifting over time to more conservative assets, bonds, and perhaps cash, and away from riskier holdings, stocks, they may stop making sense at some point depending on your situation. When you're about 10 years away from retirement, say in your mid-50s, you'll really need to be taking a holistic view and look at your whole financial picture. And so they believe that more customized asset allocation approaches are needed for this segment of investors. Roughly $1.8 trillion is invested in target date mutual funds, according to Morningstar. Most 401k plans, 98%, include this type of fund in their lineup, according to Vanguard. And 80% of all 401k participants are invested in these funds. 80% of those who invest in 401ks, which is the primary way that people build wealth over a long period of time, 80% of people, they are invested in target date funds. Now, for young investors or those with little investing experience, target date funds are particularly practical, right? Given the asset allocation reflects a long time horizon until retirement, a fund might put as much as 95% or more in stocks when you're in your 20s, and there's automatic rebalancing and de-risking over time. That usefulness can change, however, right? The not so good thing is that you put it on autopilot for the next 20 years. And as it's getting larger, you're progressing in your career and life, and you're getting other assets. The target fund is working in isolation, and that's the point when you need some coordination, right? So for example, say you reach a point where your target date fund is 70% stocks, 30% bonds, and you say you have money in another fund that's invested in solely stocks or a stock index. Depending on the amount, your stock bond ratio could be more like 90-10 in your total portfolio, right? Not just whatever the target date fund is, which may not be appropriate for your risk tolerance, generally how well you can stomach market volatility and how long until you need the money. Now, when they start adding investments to their portfolio, this could mean that taking on additional risk that they're just not aware of, right? People mess up their allocations by adding assets of different riskiness, right? So their allocation is no longer what they thought it was. Generally, these funds reach their target year with at least some money still invested in stocks and continuing to do so, although some may reduce their equity holdings. While some advisors say there's nothing wrong with continuing to rely on target date funds in retirement, others say there are reasons to reconsider. So for example, if you need to move money from one during a market pullback, it could mean selling stocks when they're down, whether you want to or not. If you're taking distributions from a target date fund, you're taking from both stocks and bonds indiscriminately. You'd rather break those pieces apart and see what makes the most sense for funding distributions. For instance, if you know you'll generate $100,000 from your retirement savings each year, you can plan to have certain number of years worth of income, say 5 years or $500,000 in cash and bonds, so you aren't put in the position of selling stocks or other volatile investments in a down market. And that kind of goes into like the bucket strategy of retirement withdrawals, which we're not really going to get into today. Now, at the outset of retirement, that can be especially detrimental to the long-term value of your nest egg. The bottom line, experts say, is to be sure to reevaluate whether your target date fund still makes sense as your financial life grows more complex or you are nearing retirement. It could be working for you or against you, but you have to track it to know, right? Don't just set it and forget it forever. So let's begin with this idea of set it and forget it. I hate the term. The reason that I hate the term, and in the same way that I hate the term passive investing, is that it kind of, denotes that you're just not doing anything, right? Or that you don't care, which I don't believe should be the case with our investments, right? I think we should be very involved in the choices that we're making with our investments, right? We shouldn't just say, hey, advisor, what should I do? What should I do? And then just do everything that they say because they say do it. Yeah, they may give great advice and you may do exactly what your advisor says, but it should be your choice, right? It should not be their choice to invest in a certain way, right? Nor should you just be investing blindly because you heard that something works and would work over a long period of time. And so you just poured money in. I mean, this is just a vast problem that I've seen from people before who, invest money in their 401ks and never went in and actually picked investments. And so they got put into some, stable value fund or whatever, and their money never grew. And they did that for 15, 20 years and then looked up and they were like, I don't have near as much money as so-and-so. And why is that? Well, because they actually invested their 401k because they actually dug in and made those types of decisions. So I don't think set it and forget it per se is a good idea. I think that picking investments that are going to be simple yet effective is valuable, right? I think it's important to not be overly complex. I think it's been proven that not being overly complex is a good thing when it comes to your investments. I think complexity for complexity's sake typically does nothing but drive returns down, not increase returns over time. So I don't think it's valuable to be complex for no reason. And I think target date funds are a good way to not be complex for no reason, right? It's a good way to be very simple in the way that you invest. But that doesn't mean that I don't agree with much of what is said in this article. I believe that target date funds should just play a role in the way that you allocate your assets. And I'll give you a few reasons why, and some of them will play off of what was talked about in this particular article. I think first and foremost, it's important to note that your financial situation gets more complex, not less, over time, right? And so your exposure to certain risks can become more and less at different times as well. And so to say that, okay, I'm going to invest in this target date fund because it fits my risk profile, and it's going to continue to fit my risk profile for the next 40 years, is fine, right? But then, having, let's say, a substantial taxable brokerage account that you're investing in an S&P 500 fund, which is all stocks, right? And you're pouring a lot of money into that, and that's growing pretty substantially relative to your target date fund in a retirement account or something. You may look up and go, okay, well, now I'm very heavy into stocks, 20 years from now, when I probably didn't want to be as heavy as I was, right? I might have wanted a more stable allocation, or I'm getting really close to retirement and I'm very, very heavy in stocks in that way, and I probably shouldn't be, right? So your overall allocation is not indicative of the allocation that is in the target date fund. That's only one piece of your pie, right? That's only one piece of your financial puzzle. So if you think, okay, my entire financial portfolio, my entire financial puzzle needs to have some type of allocation that looks like whatever it is for you, right? 50-50, 60-40, whatever. Then make sure that that's actually the case. Make sure that you are consistent in the way that you choose assets to build that type of portfolio. Because if you're not, then far more often than not, people get too risky than not risky enough, right? Far too often, people get overweight assets that are going to outperform over time. And most of the time, that's just, by the fact that those assets outperform, right? One of the most common things is people having some type of allocation in their 401k with, growth stocks and, all these types of, high growth names that are going to go up very quickly at different times. And they'll find that, look up in 5-10 years and say, oh crap, well, my, 401k that was once, 70-30 or 60-40 is now, 85-15 stocks, bonds. And they're like, well, what in the heck happened? Well, you had a lot of appreciation out of things that grew very quickly and didn't have a lot of appreciation out of like your bond funds. So that may be time to rebalance and get things back to zero. Luckily, target date funds do that for you, but they don't do it for your entire financial life and your entire financial portfolio. So you need to just keep those types of things in mind. Make sure that you don't get too risky for your own britches, and get things out of whack. Now, I also think, and this was not in this article, but I also think that when it comes to target date funds, having them actually match your risk profile is very, very important. Because I think many people are going to find one of these two things to be true. You're going to get closer to retirement, and you're either going to find that you need a more risky allocation than what the target date retirement fund is offering, right? Or you're going to want a more risky allocation. So let me explain why that would be. So some people need a more risky allocation just to create the income that they need, right? If you need to take a higher withdrawal rate from your investments, then you might take a little more risk than somebody who needs a very low withdrawal rate, right? Somebody needs to only take 2% of their investments a year in order to live the way that they want to live. Why would they invest and be more risky? There would be no reason to, right? They could invest in very low risk things, make their low return, but just live the way that they want to. But if you need 7% off your investments every year, and you're, just dead set on retiring, then you're going to need to come up with higher returns. And the only way to do that reliably is to take more risk in your portfolio, right? So a target date fund is not going to allow you to do that. You'd have to, take your money out of the target date fund and allocate it accordingly. Now, you may also be in a position where you want more risk. And the question becomes like, why in the world would I want more risk? Well, you may get in a target date fund and it takes it all the way down to, 30-70, stocks, bonds, or 20-80 stocks, bonds, whatever, right? And it takes you all the way down there. And then you realize like, hey, I'd just kind of like to see my money growing more. Like, even if it's providing you exactly what you need as far as, the money that you're going to require in retirement and the growth that you're going to require moving forward, even if it's giving you exactly what you need, you may just be like, I just want higher returns. My risk profile says I'm willing to take more risk in order to see some higher returns. And guess what? That's perfectly okay as well, right? And so the whole point is, you may get to the end of the line, you may get towards this target date and then look up and go, I think just more risk is either needed or wanted, and have to make the proper allocations on that back end. Now, I would say this as well. I want to address many of you who do invest in these target date funds. I'm not so worried about your allocation that, it's going to become a big point of contention. I'm far more worried that you aren't paying attention, right? I'm far more worried that you chose the target date fund because you didn't want to have to worry about things, right? I'm far more concerned that you just said it and did actually forget it, okay? I would rather you know what's going on, know what your current allocation is in your target date fund, right? And maybe just for simplicity's sake, hold it, right? And just for the sake of, de-risking over time, hold it. But don't sit there and hold it for the sake of not having to worry about anything, because I think that becomes irresponsible. I mean, you can just ask the Vanguard investors who, they had to, pay these big tax bills because, the fund changed a threshold for a fee. And so a bunch of people poured into one fund and poured out of another target date fund and ended up where there were big capital gains to be paid. So those were people who probably didn't understand that could actually occur. And that's why there were lawsuits on the back end and things like that, right? I have a whole episode that talks about that. But the whole point is, you need to pay attention, right? You need to know what you are invested in and know what part that's playing in your financial portfolio, and know when you decide that you're going to invest money somewhere else, why and what that allocation needs to look like to be a part of your risk profile, right? Because ultimately, every part of your portfolio is playing into the big weighted average of the risk return that's being taken in your total financial situation, which is extremely important over a long period of time. Now, am I saying that all of your assets are created equal? No, because I think that's something that is missed in this article, that all of your assets are not created equal, okay? Your 401k or your IRAs are not created equal to your taxable brokerage accounts. And your taxable brokerage accounts are not created equal to your kids' college accounts, right? Those things are not created equal for many different reasons. One could be taxes, right? And there's, tax efficiency that you may need to take into account within your taxable brokerage accounts that doesn't need to be taken into account in your 401ks or IRAs. There are time horizons that are not going to be the same for your 401ks and IRAs and taxable brokerage accounts than they will be with your kids' college accounts, right? If your kid's going to, go to college in, 15 years or 10 years, and yet you're going to still be investing for the next 30 for retirement, then those are very different time horizons. And so the riskiness that needs to be taken with those different amounts of money needs to be different, right? Or it can be the same, but it needs to be the same based on your willingness to take risk and the amount of money that you're willing to put away over time. But it doesn't need to be the same just for the sake of you didn't want to have to worry about it, or for the sake of I'm trying to keep this balance in my portfolio, so I'm taking all of this money into account together. That's just not the best way to go about it. Look, I see a lot of utility that can be had in target date funds. But I'll tell you, personally, I do not use them. All right, personally, I do not have any target date funds in anywhere in my portfolio, and I'll tell you why. Primarily, it's because I don't see the need in my own life for a bond allocation right now. Right? I mean, even let's just see. I don't know. I don't want to talk out of the wrong side of my mouth, but let's just see the Vanguard 2065 fund. Right? I just want to see what that currently holds. So let's see, that's VLXVX. That is the symbol for it. Let's see what the portfolio management is for that right now. That is 89.03% stocks, 9.49% bonds, and 1.48% short-term reserves. I don't think I need 11% bonds and cash. My personal opinion. I'm not saying that doesn't work perfectly for some of you all, but I'm just saying, I don't think I need that, right? I think I can be perfectly fine with a 100% stock portfolio, right? Which is what I have, what me and my wife have. Not to mention, there's something that I haven't mentioned that I think, even though it's minute, it can also be, at least something that moves the needle a little bit, maybe in your decision making. And that is the fees associated with target date funds relative to just your run-of-the-mill index funds. So, for instance, this target date fund has a 0.08% fee, which is, it's negligible. Anything less than 0.1, anything less than 0.25 is, really becomes negligible over time. But this is 0.08%, right? So really trending towards zero. But I could pay half as much and invest in the S&P 500, index there, VFIAX. I can invest in that directly for half as much. And if I'm going to, take a 100% stock portfolio, why would I not do that? Now, the target date retirement funds, especially at Vanguard, they do have lower minimum investments. Their minimum investment's only $1,000, whereas most of their mutual funds, it's $3,000 minimum investment. But once you're over that threshold, you're really looking at fees and the allocation in the portfolio. So ultimately, I think that's something to pay attention to. And do you really want 11% bonds if you're somebody like me? You're 25 years old, 26 years old, 27 years old, and you're like, okay, I may be in a position where I don't have to have any bonds in my portfolio. And honestly, I don't foresee putting bonds in my portfolio for a long time. So the need for a target date fund to de-risk over time is just not going to be super valuable. So I think if you aren't asleep at the wheel, it's not hard to put things together for yourself, put your allocations together for yourself as you see the need. Now, in your 401k, it may be a bit easier to just, pick a target date fund and go. But maybe in your IRAs, maybe in your, taxable brokerage accounts, you take a little more of the decision-making process to yourself. And just take the proper risk, right? That's all I'm suggesting. Take the proper risk for your portfolio, have the proper allocation. And if you're shooting for certain performance, then by all means, try to get that performance. Don't, cut yourself short based on the fact that you just wanted to quote unquote set it and forget it. So I think that this is valuable. I think this is useful for you guys. I don't want to get any of you guys running to your computers to take money out of your target date funds. If it's working for you and it's providing you good value over time, then by all means, right? And ultimately, the difference between a target date fund and just an index fund over time is not going to be super fantastically huge, right? If you take an S&P 500 versus a target date, the S&P 500 would outperform, but not by so exceedingly much that it would make just leaps and bounds of differences. But what's going to make the biggest difference is that you actually invest, that you're actually putting money away. And if you're getting that part of it right, if you're getting that part right where you are significantly investing from your income, then target date fund or not, I think you're going to be where you need to be if you're investing like 15% or more of your household income every single month. So that's what I think is important. But there are little things here that I think can provide you value, and hopefully you allow them to do so. I think it's all a matter of risk, all a matter of risk-return relationships that we're willing to pay attention to. And I think it's a matter of just not being asleep at the wheel, knowing what you're invested in, and being very thoughtful about what can be most useful to you over a long period of time. So even though this is a more nuanced conversation, hopefully it doesn't fall on deaf ears. Hopefully it falls on ears of people who, you want to do the best with your money that you absolutely can. And maybe one piece of that is taking a second look at how you're allocated towards target date retirement funds. So thanks for watching this video. If you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan. That's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. Then if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just DM me on any of the major social media sites and tell me that you are interested in financial coaching sessions, and you and I can begin working together, pushing towards your long-term financial goals and ultimately pushing you on towards long-term financial freedom, which is what I hope for every single individual who's watching or listening to this show on a day-to-day basis. So tune in tomorrow as I continue talking about personal finance topics that I think could be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. God bless.